Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kathy Ryan. I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. I am the Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Education in the Faculty of Science, as well as a hydrogeologist and faculty member in the Department of Geoscience. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very happy that we're celebrating the Faculty of Science in Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance as we recognize World Water Day and delve into the topics of wetland reclamation and aquatic ecosystem health in Alberta. We're recording today's session and we'll be posting this video on the Faculty of Science website. I encourage you to check our website, science.ucalgary.ca, for event listings and video updates. Just a reminder that if our webinar becomes disconnected before the event ends, give us a minute to restart the webinar. You'll be able to rejoin the webinar by using the same login link. And hosting this panel online provides us with a great opportunity to engage with attendees from around the globe. As we gather today, I'm sure we're all thinking about the fact that we share this virtual space with lots of people, both near and far. And we are broadcasting here from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which comprise the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley Nations. Also, we are also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And the University of Calgary is situated on land that is adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. This is the traditional Blackfoot area that's known as Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. Today's presentation is a great example of the industry partnerships that we have. The University of Calgary has always been deeply integrated with our community, and this sharing of expertise provides significant benefits to both parties. Many researchers in our faculty and across campus have long-standing research connection to the Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, or COSIA, and we worked together to solve some of today's most pressing issues. Whether that's increased efficiency in steam generation and steam-assisted gravity drainage in the oil sands, or wetlands sustainability, we know that when we're problem solving together, we're arriving at better solutions. I'd like to take this moment to thank COSIA and its members, and also the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada for investing in research at the University of Calgary by funding Dr. Jan Siborowski's Industrial Research Chair. Today, we'll hear from two of our faculty members, Dr. Jan Siborowski, the NSERC COSIA Industrial Research Chair in Oil Sands Reclamation, and also Dr. Kelly McKittrick, who is our Campus Alberta Innovates Program Research Chair in Aquatic Ecosystem Health. And we'll also hear from COSIA's Chief Executive, Wes Jickling, about how industry and academic collaborations lead to advancements that will result in economic, social, and environmental benefits for Canada. I'm pretty excited to hear from Jan, Kelly, and Wes, and then hear from you. We'll have about 20 minutes for your questions. On the housekeeping front, I know that many will have questions, or I hope that many will have questions for our speakers. You can type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have them for our Q&A session after the presentations. We certainly appreciate questions. There may be limited time and we may not be able to answer all of them. We'll do our best, and when there's similar questions, we'll group them together. So our first guest today is Dr. Kelly McKittrick, the Campus Alberta Innovates Program Research Chair in Aquatic Ecosystem Health at the University of Calgary. Kelly was most recently at Wilfrid Laurier University, where he was the Executive Director, Cold Regions and Water Initiatives, and a professor in the Department of Biology. Before that, he held a Canada Research Chair in Ecosystem Health Assessment at the University of New Brunswick. And he also spent 5 years in Calgary as the Director of Environmental Monitoring and Risk Assessment at COSIA. Today, Dr. Munkittrick will give us a glimpse into his work monitoring fish populations and other indicators of health in rivers, streams, and lakes across Alberta, and also how his research is developing an integrated framework that will link all of that monitoring data together in one single system that anyone can access and that will serve as a number of different purposes. So I will put you into Kelly Munkittrick's hands here.
Thanks, Kathy. Next slide, please. Thanks. My research program is focused on helping people design adaptive monitoring programs. There's a lot of different reasons that people conduct environmental monitoring, and it often falls down to this is what we've always done, or this is what we're told to do. And many programs continue to collect the data without a use for it once it's collected other than a checkbox. When I think about environmental monitoring, I divide it into 12 different types of monitoring programs, ranging from environmental compliance to things like status and trends monitoring, environmental effects monitoring, performance monitoring, and a variety of other types. These different programs often operate in the same area, but they lack a consistent framework, a consistent rationale or methodology, and often fail to integrate the data across programs. In 2011, I worked with a large team to help design the new monitoring framework for regional oil sands monitoring. And in 2013, I took 5 years off from my research chair at the University of New Brunswick to work with COSIA to try to help industry adapt to the new monitoring philosophy. Next slide, please. One of the first questions I asked is, how much monitoring do you currently do? Monitoring is split within companies into different facilities, different responsibilities, different media, things like air, water, soil, different regulatory requirements, and it isn't generally centralized in a large company. We did an inventory at COSIA and estimated that industry was spending 180 million a year in monitoring in the oil sands. And although most data is not centralized, collection permits for fish monitoring do get registered in a provincial database. And in 2013 and 14 alone, there was more than 170 provincial fish collection permits to 22 different consulting companies in the oil sands region. Each of those companies doing the monitoring for a different purpose, often using different methods, but not linking the data in a way that it can be meaningfully used. Getting better monitoring done isn't always about spending more money. It can be about aligning what's already going on. Next slide, please. What we've been working on in our research group is trying to create a common framework for pre-development, construction, and post-operational monitoring to align that monitoring, create efficiencies, focus costs, and provide solutions. We're trying to develop decision-making criteria. When should people pay attention? When do they have to act? How do they use the data to optimize processes? And most importantly, how do they align monitoring between companies so that they develop efficiencies? One of the good aspects of an organization like COSIA is that it opened up transparency across companies for issues that were not competitive, like environmental protection. For example, when I was at COSIA, I worked with 17 different companies to try and align their wetlands monitoring into an adaptive program. We found out that companies were using a variety of methods for vegetation analysis. Aligning methods across companies allows each company to use reference site information from others, increasing the power of the data, the applicability, creating cost efficiencies, and creating a real regional database. Trying to create broader cooperation and sharing between academia, industry, government, and other groups that monitor or want monitoring is key to making a more integrated system to achieve sustainability. Industry partnerships have an important role to play. They're already investing a large amount of money in monitoring, so it's wise that we make good use of it. And I'll turn it over back to Kathy here.
Great, thanks very much, Kelly. I can't imagine how exciting it is to align $180 million a year of monitoring that involves 170 fish collection permits and 22 companies. That seems like both an exciting and a necessary endeavor. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jan Siborowski. Jan is a leading wetlands scientist with a passion for solving big environmental questions. And in fact, he is the NSERC COSIA Industrial Research Chair in Oil Sands Reclamation. He's done substantial work in the Great Lakes and in the Alberta oil sands region, and he's recognized as an international leader in understanding the effects of environmental disturbance. He actually started his chair here at the University of Calgary at the beginning of the pandemic in April 2020. And he's had a great start, notwithstanding the pandemic. But over the next 4 years, he's really poised to give oil sands companies a means of assessment to measure the success of wetlands reclamation. And his research extends also into wetlands everywhere. The question that Dr. Siborowski is tackling under his chair program is, how do we know that this wetland that we're creating will be sustainable in the long term? So please join me in welcoming Jan as he walks us through his work and talks about how he's been able to develop novel biological indicators that measure reclamation success. Jan.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And thank you, Kelly, for giving that great introduction to all of the challenges we have when we try to understand the condition of the environment over large expanses of areas. I'm sure you've all seen photographs like this in Landsat. This is the oil sands mining industry. And the results of the economic benefits, which are pretty substantial, providing millions of dollars worth of barrels of oil, but at a cost, represented by the fact that large amounts of land are being cleared, and a significant amount of that is peatlands as well. The real challenge is for the companies to fulfill their agreements and their promises to reclaim this landscape back to what it used to look like before, or at least to its capability as well. And this is absolutely essential for society to condone or at least approve the work that's gone on from before. And so what I'm going to, my program is actually a sort of conceptual application of the types of monitoring that Kelly has talked about. Could I have the next slide, please? So the companies have been studying environmental reclamation for as long as they've been doing their mining as well. And early on, around 2000s, when I became involved, the companies had built a number of structures to understand, can wetlands be built and what are the toxicological effects of doing that? And here's the Syncrude demonstration facility. Suncor also built a number of wetlands, and over the years, our students and other researchers looked at these different sorts of things to understand how are the wetlands developing. And that research really contributed to new knowledge to the companies themselves. Over the years, we found out that, in fact, if you build a wetland, a reference wetland can be productive. If it's got oil sands materials somewhat less, it can be biodiverse. And most importantly, it seems to be sustainable without intervention so far. That information has really helped the companies in understand the relationships and scale things up. Next slide, please. And so around 2010 to 2012, the major companies built their first full-scale constructed landscapes on reclaimed watersheds. And so Sandhill Fen was built on top of a tailings pit. Nakanodi Fen was built on top of a storage dump area. And after 1 year, they started to green up. And after 5 years or so, they look beautifully green, and lots of plants, lots of wildlife, lots of invertebrates. And so these look very, very attractive and so on. And certainly they seem to have all the signs of what we would call a successful wetland. Another interesting thing that was found is that not only can wetlands be built in these areas, next slide please, but if we look at the upland areas where things were reclaimed for forestry, we also found a large number of opportunistic wetlands where the water simply seeps to the surface and starts to spontaneously develop into newly formed wetlands. And this is also promising because 10 to 20% of that upland area seems to be returning to a wetland as well. The question really is, though, no matter how green and how diverse these things seem to be, are they successful? Are they natural, or are they going to be sustained? Next slide, please. And so the goal of our program, which is the Boreal Wetland Assessment Reclamation Program, is really to address some really important industry and public needs. So wetlands are being built, they look successful, but are they truly there? We just don't have any quantitative measures of that. And so both the operators and the regulators and we as society need some means of assessing that and saying, are these wetlands effective or not? And so the BRAP program is building those assessment tools. And so my students and colleagues and I will be working on that over the next period of time. There are all sorts of different stressors in wetlands, but the key ones really are, how disturbed and how homogeneous is the wetland, how big or small it is. Bigger ones obviously are going to be perhaps better. How permanent is the water? A wetland isn't going to sustain if it dries up soon. And also, what is the quality of the water that's there? And so our plan is to sample 150 of these wetlands over the next 4 years or so and see how they range from acceptable to unacceptable according to all of these different stressors. Next slide. Of course, all of our success to date and our future success really depends on our ability to work with the scientific groups within the industrial partners. And over the years, we've had excellent interactions, and by being able to visit those sites, train our students and so on, and have guidance of the industry and provide guidance to them, we've had very good, big success about that. For the next 3 years, next slide, please. Our goal then is to go to a whole bunch of wetlands with our students and our colleagues and measure all the different attributes of these newly forming wetlands, both in reclaimed areas and in reference areas where water has pooled up. And so we'll be measuring hydrology, chemistry, birds, plants, and invertebrates. And those data are going to be used then, next slide, please, to calibrate, to find out how do our biological indicators, such as plant richness, for example, change as we go from what we consider to be very acceptable conditions to perhaps less acceptable conditions, and how do we find the range of natural variation, where are the thresholds, and what might be the triggers that force us to take action to see if things are appropriate or not. Once we have that, those calibration measures, next slide, please, we can sort of map them onto these different stressor pyramids and find out where are the transitions between acceptable and not unacceptable, and do we have to take action to try and reclaim that, or see how things change through time. Next slide, please. And of course, the unique feature about this entire landscape, may I have the next slide, please? The unique feature is that these attributes are going to change through time. And as we, back one slide, please, sorry. And so we plan to track wetlands at different ages and see how long does it take to get back to an acceptable range, and can we predict from this stage here after 5 or 10 years if we're really going to be on track to what we consider to be a successful or sustainable wetland. This approach, which we call the reclamation assessment approach, really tracks how natural landscapes recover from disturbance. And so, although we're working in the oil sands, next slide, please, this approach should be applicable to any place where disturbances have occurred. And of course, the Boreal region represents 60% of Canada's area, huge economic benefits, but huge stresses through pulp and paper and through mining. But we believe that these approaches can use the data that are already being collected by those different companies and assess what are the trajectories, and ultimately anticipate the costs and the benefits and the way we can reclaim these systems to go back to their natural uses. So that's where we're planning to work for the next little while, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Sampling 150 wetlands certainly seems daunting, but I know that you'll have the assistance of capable graduate students and postdocs to assist you with that. And I think I can speak for both COSIA and the Faculty of Science when I say that we're very glad that you're here. I now have the pleasure of welcoming the COSIA Chief Executive, Wes Jickling. Before joining COSIA in 2019, Wes was the Chief Executive Officer of Innovation Saskatchewan. He has held senior roles in various organizations, including the United Nations. And Wes's bachelor's degree is right here from the University of Calgary, where he played 4 years with the men's Dinos basketball team. And Wes will be talking to us today about why COSIA partners with university researchers and how that benefits members of the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. Wes.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy, and thanks to the Faculty of Science at the U of C for hosting this. I know we're a few days past World Water Day, but happy World Water Day. Thank you for hosting this event. I'll put some slides up in just a second. But what I wanted to do first is just talk about the work that's being supported here, the research that's going to be happening, and in particular how important that is to our organization, COSIA, Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, and also to our owners, to the oil sands producing companies in Canada. Obviously, wetlands are extremely important to us. Wetland reclamation is an important part of COSIA's focus and the focus of some of the world's leading experts, which I would argue work in the oil sands producing companies. So we really appreciate this, opportunity, the availability of this expertise so close to home, and the ability to work so closely with them. And so, like I said, from my point of view, it's complementing some of the world-leading expertise that we have internally in oil sands companies on wetland reclamation, complementing that with, again, world-leading academic and fundamental research at the University of Calgary and your researchers. I think Jan has done a very good job of talking about the importance of wetlands and not only in the oil sands region, but also in the Canadian boreal forest. Obviously, the oil sands has an impact, or it disturbs the boreal forest in which it's located in northern Alberta. And, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Jan said here. 60% of Canada's landmass is boreal forest, and half of that boreal forest is wetlands, and that takes a number of different forms. Wetlands are a complex ecosystem, and so it's extremely important for our experts. When I say our experts, I'm talking about the experts in our member companies, to reconstruct or reclaim wetlands. And as Dr. Siborowski said, that's been happening for a few years. These look great. It appears that things are back and healthy, and we're seeing the plant life and invertebrates and insect life returning. But in terms of, an approaches to assessing the health and the sustainability of those ecosystems, of those wetlands of various types, extremely important that we're engaging with the best and brightest researchers and experts on this topic to complement, again, our own expertise and our own experience in this area. So obviously very excited, really looking forward to the work that Jan and others are going to be doing and building upon that knowledge and our leadership in wetland reclamation. I'm going to just share a screen with you, and bear with me as I bring this up, and I will make that full screen, I hope. Okay, so I won't spend too long on this, but I think it's important, I think, just to explain, take a couple of minutes to tell you about COSIA, because it's the organization that is supporting this important research, that's working with Jan and the team. And I think it's important to understand that part of it too, the industry engagement with this U of C research chair. And I think what you have, I guess at the very top, I would just say, I think COSIA is a one of a kind, unique in the world innovation organization. And the main reason for that is it's made up of 7 competitors. These are 7 Canadian oil sands companies who, for all intents and purposes, are competing with one another. But when it comes to environmental performance, when it comes to the improvement of our impact on the environment in the oil sands region, they decided in 2012 that it was too important. The environment was too important to compete on. And secondly, that we can go faster if we pool our resources and go together. We can do more research, we can get better outcomes. And so that's really the underlying principles for COSIA. Maybe just a very brief bit of detail here. What does that look like? We sort of talk about COSIA, talk about the way we work, those 7 companies work together. We talk about that as, at least I do, as extreme collaboration. And what I mean by extreme collaboration, we're sharing intellectual property amongst competitors, technology amongst competitors, scientific findings, technical information. We're co-funding research, very much like the research we're co-funding here with this wetland reclamation chair. And all of this collaboration, like unlike any other industry or any other group of competitors or companies, all of that is focused on environmental performance, things like aquatic ecosystems and wetland reclamation. And I think it's kind of a corny way to say it, but it feels like a very Canadian way of looking after the environment. It's extreme collaboration, obviously focused entirely on environmental performance. Really briefly here, just to point out the importance of academic partnerships for COSIA. We've put just a few of them on the screen here, where we're collaborating with NSERC, where we're collaborating with great Canadian research universities. And U of C is obviously one of those, but this is, very key part of the portfolio of research and technology development, environmental research and technology development that COSIA does, is in partnership with universities and NSERC. Just a couple of headline comments here. Over the 9 years, right, we were formed in 2012. Over the 9 years, these 4 figures give you some sense of the scale that we've been able to accomplish together in terms of environmental performance or environmental technology development. Very nearly 1,100 technologies or pieces of intellectual property exchanged or shared amongst the competitors. Those are worth the cost. This isn't the impact, but the cost of those is $1.6 billion. There's over 200 active projects right now, this being one of them, this research chair. So very active in this sort of very Canadian extreme collaboration, if you will. I realize I'm probably in excess of my 5 minutes, Kathy. Obviously there's several hundred projects that we could talk about here. We're really focused on Dr. Siborowski and that research chair program today. I'll just put this up here. I think if people want to go and have a look on our website, here's just a couple of other examples. Compensation Lakes, you can see a VR tour link there. Boreal Ecosystem and Assessment Project is there, as well as our work on faster forests. So again, if these or any other projects that COSIA is working on interest you as it relates to wetland reclamation or land reclamation or anything, in fact, on environmental performance, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And I will turn it back to Kathy.
Great, thanks so much, Wes. I like the extreme collaboration note there, and think we all have so much to gain from that. So I'll ask all the 3 panelists to turn on their cameras and get ready for questions. I'm happy to say we have a dozen or more questions in the chat. And I'll start with one that starts with an apology, true Canadian, but I realize now that that they typed in half a question beforehand, so that's why they apologized. This is for Jan. Jan, you spoke about the applicability of the work that you're doing with COSIA to other boreal locations. Where in the world is similar work ongoing that we can learn from in Alberta's northern industries? And are there even broader relationships and partnerships that we could leverage and have even more extreme collaboration?
That's a really good question. I think what's the greatest opportunities are to apply the approach that we're using in the oil sands area, sort of summarizing the fact that there are many, many different things that have disturbed the environment, but in fact, there's a smaller number of underlying factors that would control the rate at which things can restore themselves. And using this approach of reducing the number of things we can look at, using new technology to assess the environment, look at areas of different ages, we can quantify the thresholds that are critical, the ones that are less important, and look at the drivers of that and make recommendations about how we could speed up the repair or recovery process. And so it's the approach that I think is applicable everywhere. There will be places where we can talk about recovery from disturbance. I guess anywhere that there are tailings, we could use some of the same approaches as well, but maybe not at the same scale that we've been using in the oil sands.
Great, and thank you. I have a question here from Tammy. Does your wetland monitoring program include information to quantify energy or carbon balances in these systems? Are you collecting data to do this? And how does the monitoring program compare to some of the classical small-scale biochemistry studies? Any lessons learned from those?
That's an excellent question, and there are so many different things we can measure and we can assess. Our lab's work over the next 3 or 4 years really is directed towards understanding how the biota are responding to these different changes. But we're working with collaborators who are very interested in the success of wetlands as measured through carbon sequestration. Really, one of the key measures of success of a wetland is, does it start fixing carbon again? Do we see the precursors of peat being developed? And although our lab can't work on that, we have collaborators who are part of our larger group who are also looking at that as well, and we'll be able to exchange data. A lot of our data logging, looking at measures of conductivity, biomass production, and so on, can be shared with those individuals who are actually doing the carbon balances, and our remote sensing data will also be available to those other individuals as well.
Great, thank you. So I have 3 questions that I'm going to try to bundle here. 2 are from Maureen and 1 is from Zvonko. And so the bundled questions, and I think maybe Wes will weigh in on this as well as Kelly, is, are there publicly available data? Do you have long-term monitoring data? And is the intellectual property, the results of the extreme collaboration, available to be shared with public and environmental groups?
Kelly, would you like to start? And I can fill in on the future if you can talk about the past and present.
Well, I think there's a number of different issues in there, and I'll let Wes speak to the technology being shared within COSIA. One of the big challenges we have with environmental monitoring is trying to get regional data into a place that it's accessible and in a consistent format, and so that's a huge issue. The regional oil sands monitoring program has been working for 9 years now, working at trying to build an accessible database to put the information they're collecting. It's just a big challenge trying to get data shared and available in a place that's easy to access. Jan?
And I think that's the biggest challenge we've always faced as well. There's an incredible amount of data, but it's been collected over the years by different people. It goes into theses and publications, but we use different instruments. We use different software programs, so on, to store that. And one of our first steps in this chair is to build a database that's sort of harmonizable, that will let us collect the existing data into a format that we can all use and share, and that can be made available to the other groups as well. Certainly, there's, I know in the regional monitoring work that's gone on is available on a public database through Environment Canada and through Alberta Environment. And so those are some of the off-lease areas that have been collected. And certainly our agreement with COSIA and with the university is that all of the data that we collect is publicly available, because it's been paid for by the province and the country, and that is a basic and fundamental part of the intellectual property and the information we collect.
Thanks. Maybe if I could just kind of chime in at the end here. It's a good question. And I think Kelly and Jan have done a good job talking about the data and the research that's generated from this program. And now, as it relates to COSIA, I did talk about the collaborative model of research and technology development amongst companies within COSIA. What we do have publicly available on our website is research reports, which really talk about or summarize or present a discussion on the ongoing research programs that COSIA has, well beyond what's happening here with Dr. Siborowski's program. So those are available. Typically, it won't be a big data dump if that's not the intent of those reports. I guess the other thing we would say is with the oil sands monitoring program, there's, I think the number last I heard is 700 research papers have been conducted using the data gathered, and obviously I'm getting into an area that Dr. McKittrick is very, very familiar with here. But those research reports are available publicly. As for the intellectual property or the technologies developed or intellectual property developed, that's not something that we post on the website. What we do share is the research reports, and obviously as explained by Dr. Siborowski and Dr. McKittrick, the result of the research conducted will be shared through those forums.
Great, thank you to all of the panelists. I have a question now from Del Tares and University of Twente, from PIM. Very interesting presentations, thank you. A question for Dr. Siborowski. Perhaps I missed it, but will you be measuring natural wetlands as well? Will you be comparing development and indicators of reclaimed wetlands with more natural ones? And subsequently, how do you include general trends observed in natural development in the research of your reclaimed wetlands?
Thank you. That's a really important and interesting question, and it really challenged us for a long period of time. We really are interested in the opportunistic wetlands that I showed some photographs of before, and they're spontaneously forming. We didn't do anything about that until you realize that, in fact, the companies put that entire landscape there. That used to be an open pit, or it used to be scarified area that's had materials put on top of it. So how can we say that's natural? And so although we can't create a brand new wetland and call it natural, I guess if we could find a lot of beaver ponds, we might do that, but they wouldn't be large enough. So our as close to natural as possible approach is to go into the natural landscape and look at areas that are being developed recently by putting in winter roads and summer roads and other excavations to get to new areas. And when a road is put in, it disrupts the flow of water underground, even though it might not disturb the landscape on either side. And so the water tends to pool up on the upstream side of the road. It dries out on the downstream side. That's another environmental stress and bad news normally. But what it means is if we can find recent roads, we can find a brand new wetland that's forming on a natural landscape. And although that isn't completely natural, it's as close as I think we can find to the spontaneous formation of a new wetland. And that's what we're calling our equivalent to reference. And we'll compare that to the wetlands forming on the reclaimed landscape where all the underburden has been placed in that area.
Great, thank you, Jan. Okay, question for Kelly now from a graduate student in the Faculty of Science that I'm quite partial to. Kelly, how do you encourage, well, first of all, you spoke about you don't want to do things like you've always done them. We don't monitor the same things because we've always monitored those things. So the question is, how do you encourage innovation while working towards useful consistency in data collection and reporting across different parties? Sorry, let me do that again. How do you encourage innovation while working towards useful consistency in data collection and reporting across many different parties?
Sure, there's a number of aspects to innovation. One aspect is associated with ways that you look at and analyze data over time. The innovation in terms of novel approaches to environmental assessment are important to evaluate. When the thing we try and do is ensure that there's a core set of components that remain consistent. And over time, if new methods come that are shown to be of value, that you take the time to make sure that you calibrate them against the old tools before you replace them. And so the consistency is in the core components. We divide monitoring into a number of tiers of intensity or effort of monitoring. Surveillance monitoring, focused monitoring, investigation of cause studies. Innovation really comes in a lot on the focus studies and the innovation and the investigation of cause. And the surveillance programs, we look to try and keep more consistency in those because they're really aimed at following data over time to look for change.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move back to Jan now. Jan, what are some of the common data gaps, if any, that you notice while you're conducting your studies?
That's a really good question. I mean, we really do try to monitor the key environmental features that are there. And I guess part of the good news is that what we've always thought were gaps because we just simply couldn't collect the data. You know, you can slog through a kilometer of bush to get to this brand new wetland and take a measurement, take a water sample, and then walk all the way back. And that tells you what the conditions were like at that moment. But in the last 5 years, there's been incredible development in technology. You know, we have drones, so we can look at the very accurately, more accurately than ever before. And there's been tremendous development in loggers. So we can put a meter into a wetland that will tell us the concentration of oxygen, the conductivity, the salinity, the water level every 15 minutes, and we can leave it in there for the entire season and then pull it out and get a continued record. Well, that would be a data gap before, but now with the technology and with the support we've gotten from, you know, to purchase this equipment, we're going to have a wealth of data that we'll be able to interpret and really get a handle on these things. We cannot do everything with our monitoring, and so we really are emphasizing things we can see. I've seen another question asking, you know, will we be monitoring buildup of toxins and contaminants and so on? And again, we have only the resources to do so much, and so our wetlands we're looking at are developing on reclaimed substrates, which supposedly will be consistent across the site, and we're collecting what data we can, but this is not a toxicological study. It's a biodiversity and sustainability and study. We have to leave the toxicology to another group to understand those aspects of the system.
Great, thank you. We've got about 4 questions related to climate change here, and I'm going to read Michelle's. Are the stresses associated with climate change, for example, dying trends or high rainfall events, factored into your research on wetlands and the assessment approach that you are using?
Yes, and so, one of the big questions is, what is climate change going to do? Well, as you've said, climate change represents the changes in the temperature profile, when the seasons will start and end, and the intensity and timing of precipitation. And all of those are the fundamental features that sustain a wetland. A wetland is going to be permanent or temporary depending on how much water is coming in, how much is evaporating, how much is being taken up by the vegetation, which develops as these wetlands age. Dry areas are going to lead to decomposition of things like peat, and so loss of carbon, whereas the development of the plants is going to result in the creation of carbon. These are all aspects of the features that we're monitoring, and they will go into sort of the composite measure of our water balance and we're not measuring the carbon balance per se, but certainly the plant health and biomass. So we're aware of these. They're in the input variables. And because our 150 wetlands involve going to wetlands that developed different periods of time ago, we're inferring that conditions 30 years ago are similar enough to current ones that whatever we're seeing in a 30-year-old wetland is what we hope our young wetlands will look like in 30 years. That's how we were calibrating our different time points.
Thanks. A question now from Alain. Regarding the 150 wetlands that the IRC team will be, or the insert COSIA chair will be sampling, reference and reclaimed wetlands, are the range of wetlands forms being considered for monitoring as per the Alberta wetland classification system?
That's a really good question as well. And there are a number of different classification systems. When we started our research, we were using the Ducks Unlimited version, but we collect the data and we can classify the wetlands however we wish. To be consistent with Alberta guidelines and Alberta Parks and Conservation, we will certainly provide our assessments in terms of the Alberta classification system. But we can use different classifications if we wish to. And a really critical feature of the wetlands we will select from our inventory is to make sure we sample the full natural range. And so before we can start, we have to inventory our wetlands and find out, which are the big and small ones, which are the freshwater ones, which are the sodic ones, and so on, so that we're sure that the data we collect, the data points, represent the full range of variation in those environments, so we can interpolate rather than have to extrapolate beyond what the conditions are.
Great, thank you. I have a question now, I think, for Wes. Wes, how does COSIA guarantee, or does COSIA guarantee, that IP, intellectual property, and technologies are actually implemented by the member companies? Do you have a follow-up with them?
Sure, thanks. It's a really interesting question, and these are, at the end of the day, 7 energy companies, 7 competitors, and they've created COSIA to assist them in the sharing and the acceleration of science, research, technology development. There are lots of examples of technologies that have been developed or new knowledge developed that's been applied across member companies. It's not, fortunately or unfortunately, it's not up to COSIA to decide if the member companies actually, take part of a piece of, findings or technology or whatever. Certainly we do see those technologies showing up in their operations and in their reclamation efforts. But I'm not able to sit here and say, X% has been, or, guarantee, 100% guarantee, not at all. What I will say, there are plenty of examples, as I said, where, new knowledge or technology that's been developed and shared across our members has been deployed. for example, in the land EPA or the land environmental priority area, things like, reclamation or faster forests is one of the projects that we've worked on collaboratively with their members. Those are areas where, the learnings, the experience, the technical expertise, the technical information associated with a particular reclamation project, that's openly shared with the competitors or with the other COSIA members, such that it can be applied and built upon by other member companies. There's other examples, right? Like I said, we have other environmental priority areas in water, tailings, and greenhouse gases. And in the greenhouse gas area, or in the priority area of greenhouse gas, one of the technologies that was shared and I think deployed relatively widely was that of rifle tubes. It's a design of tubing for in situ and in transporting steam, and it results in some efficiencies and steam quality. And that's one where obviously if there's an improvement in steam quality and efficiency, that's a reduction in the requirement for natural gas heat and by extension greenhouse gas. So look, I think the short answer, Kathy, is obviously the companies are spending money to develop new knowledge and new technologies to improve environmental performance. There's an industry pull. There's regulatory requirements. There's tremendous commitment to improving environmental performance. When good technologies and good new knowledge arise, that's deployed. But as far as a guarantee, no, I'm not able to provide that.
Great. Thanks, Wes. I'm going to try to bundle two questions for you here, Jan. So your team will be monitoring biodiversity in wetland environments over time as a measure of how well the reclamation is going. Will you be monitoring levels of tailings-derived metals and organics? And is there a specific indicator you will use to assess salinity due to oil and gas activities?
We are collecting water from every wetland, and we'll collect it in spring and summer. And we will be analyzing that water for cations and anions, and so that's all of the constituents of that surface water. We also will have one student who's looking at the groundwater contributions as well, but mainly as a measure of estimating how much of the water in the wetland comes from the ground versus the precipitation. So we will have not just the concentration, but the identity of the different salt constituents. Our loggers will be measuring conductivity, which is a nice sort of minute by minute assessment of what's there. We are going to collect single samples that will include giving us estimates of metals and organics, but that's not something we can include in the seasonal changes that are there. And we would assume that spot measurement will give us an idea about what the levels of other contaminants are if they are there in the environment.
Great, thank you. And I'm told that we just have one time left for one more question. And Jan, this is an easy question. It's a yes or no. It's coming from the Siborowski fan club. The person, Bob, wants to know when we're going to wish you happy birthday. Is this your birthday?
Yes, it is. So.
Well, I think
it was a great party. Thank you all for inviting me.
I think I speak for all of us when I say that we wish you a happy birthday. And Bob also comments that you look a bit old for 35 years old. Yeah, you do look a bit old for 35 years old. So happy 35th birthday. So I want to thank everyone for sharing their time with us today that is attending. And thank you also for your questions. On the behalf of the Faculty of Science and COSIA, it's really been a pleasure spending this lunch hour with you and being able to share some of the great research that's being done in the Faculty of Science and learning more about partners like COSIA who support and invest in our work. Have a good day, everyone.